Okay, let's get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We are here for an expert-led panel discussion on expanding FaceBase to accommodate research needs for integrated EHR, imaging, and Omics data. My name is Vidhya Venkateswaran. I will be moderating this panel. I'm a data scholar with NIDCR, working on creating and expanding data resources to the DOC research community. Let me just give a brief overview of why we are here. Electronic health records and clinical data hold tremendous value to researchers and to patients, with new studies coming out every day demonstrating this value and changing the way we practice. A significant amount of work has been done in this space, but there is a lot of catching up to do because of the siloed nature of the available data and difficulties with integration across systems. With this in mind, Lou and I have been discussing with
let's see, I'm Carl Kesselman. I'm a professor of engineering at USC and co-PI of FaceBase, along with Yang Chai.
And I'm Mary Marazita, Distinguished Professor of Oral and Craniofacial Sciences and Human Genetics at the University of Pittsburgh.
I'm Thankam Thyvalikakath, Professor and Associate Dean for Dental Informatics and Digital Health at IU School of Dentistry and Research Scientist at Regan Streif Institute.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yang Chai. I'm a clinician scientist, professor at the University of Southern California. I serve as a co-PI along with Carl Kesselman, FaceBase.
Thank you so much. So can we start off with a question for the FaceBase folks here? Can you talk to us a little bit about the motivation behind expanding FaceBase to accommodate this new data? Both Carl and Yang.
Okay, I can start and then Yang can finish. I mean, I think our motivation is primarily driven by community requirements and needs and impact. I mean, so historically, FaceBase, well, we've always had some degree of human subject data, but limited clinical elements. And I think, our primary motivation is to meet the needs of the community and to expand the impact of FaceBase, that we need to transition from being heavily focused on animal models to include more human data. And so I think that would be our primary motivation, is just to make us more scientifically relevant and valuable. And I would say, the time is right. We've really gotten kind of a good handle on the data elements we have and the diversity of data that we have currently. And we have the bandwidth and the capacity and the understanding to really kind of reach out and broaden our user community and the types of data that we have. And I would say that's really our motivation. Yang?
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I think, the most important motivation is really about how we can improve the impact and to improve human health, right? And we want to use FaceBase as a platform where we can provide all the tools to support better clinical diagnosis, translational studies, and collaboration with other institutes, with other data resources to bring it together. We talked about crowdsourcing earlier, and then talked about how we can use FaceBase to bring the data resource that are otherwise be just kind of scattered in different places. So this will help us to provide a much stronger impact on human health. And the other part is really, if we talk about development in machine learning and AI, that really needs a large amount of data to be able to support this type of future study. And in terms of, the opportunity, what we talked about earlier in the last session, I think now we can identify maybe one or two areas where FaceBase can set it up as a pilot project where we can use electronic health records and other type of patient data to support more of a translational research, and then see how the study that we do in craniofacial field is connected with the rest of the human health. And then I'm looking forward to hearing from other panelists, and then just see how we can use this, whether we choose congenital birth defects or periodontal disease or dental caries or infectious disease, some other. It just get a couple pilot projects going, so that way we can use this as a case study to move forward.
Yes, thank you so much. The next question is for Dr. Thankam and Dr. Marazita. If you can give us some specific examples of how electronic health records-based research has either already or could potentially extend your own particular research questions, and why you think big database studies are critical to the discovery and knowledge translation to clinical application.
Well, that's a big question. So, as many of you know, the studies that I've been doing are genomic studies of various oral and craniofacial traits, including facial birth defects, primarily cleft lip and cleft palate, dental disorders such as dental caries, periodontal disease, et cetera, and normal facial variation. So for all of those studies, we've had a big emphasis on deep phenotyping. So in our own data that we've collected from our study subjects, we have very deep phenotyping. It's not as deep as health records though. So in talking to FaceBase and NIDCR, we've been talking about ways we could maybe link some of our research data with electronic health records, either from the dental school or from the medical school or both. And it's a very complicated question. So the reason to do it, though, is to really increase the granularity of the data that we have, because the data was collected in the field, not in the best, clinical modality, say. So if we could supplement and complement that with electronic health records, it could make the data sets even more useful that we've now been uploading to FaceBase. Should I keep going or stop there as the first answer?
As the first answer, I think this question is focused on the pros that you think of, but the next big chunk is for the challenges, which would be a deeper discussion.
Right.
Yeah. Dr. Thankam?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with sharing my experiences. So one of all these studies have been funded by NIDCR. So one of the first study that we did was to test the feasibility of using private practice data, and that study was funded through the National Dental Practice-Based Research Network, and we recruited 99 dental practices who used two different systems, Dentrix and ESoft, and it was a proof of concept, and we were able to show we answered two questions: survival of root canal treated teeth and how long posterior composite restorations last. And that gave us, we had about 218,000 patients. And it was big data, and it gave us a lot of insights. For example, we found that root canal treated teeth, if they are crowned, they would last 14 years compared to 8 years if they are not crowned. So we also saw differences across different sites within the network. Northeast had the longest survival of root canal treated teeth compared to those that were done in Midwest or on the West Coast or even in the Southwest. So that's the strength of big data. The other project I want to mention is our work on Sjogren's disease, patients with Sjogren's disease. What we did at Indiana University is we linked our patients' dental record data with their medical record that's available through the Health Information Exchange, Indiana Health Information Exchange, which is one of the oldest health information exchange in the country. So it gave a comprehensive coverage of their medical conditions, and we characterized their clinical presentations using medical record data, which was very interesting. What we found was a varying levels of clinical presentation. Some patients may have dry mouth, dry eyes, but then some patients may not have dry eyes, dry mouth. They may have some other systemic involvement that leads to Sjogren's disease, which means there is just a lot of variation. The other big insight was non-specific symptoms that could mimic other conditions could also be, those patients could be having Sjogren's disease. And oftentimes, 5 years before they receive a confirmed Sjogren's disease diagnosis, they are diagnosed for non-specific conditions, joint pain, overall pain, myalgia, fatigue, and then 5 years later, they get diagnosed with Sjogren's. So what we collaborated with our basic science researchers and everything, and we looked at the data and we realized our salivary diagnostic colleague, she said, inflammation can be a prodrome for Sjogren's disease. And there are many omics studies that support that hypothesis. So now what we are proposing is to screen women who have a diagnosis of these conditions and look for salivary biomarkers and perform saliva hypofunction tests in the attempt to find an early biomarker. So what I'm trying to say is EHR-based data could lead to hypothesis generation for clinical research and basic science research. Our basic science research, another colleague, he's developing a mouse model that's of a female menopause model with dry mouth to mimic dry, to take it to the next level. So those are trends. Yeah.
So I think the point here is that the research can flow both directions, and it's not always basic science to clinical to EHR, but we can use EHR to go back to the bench for further research and further questions. Yeah, Dr. Shum.
Thank you. I'm a little slow this morning. It's actually a question back to Yang. So can you expand on your idea about pilots in FaceBase? Are you talking about looking at the clinical data that's already in FaceBase and see if we have access to the electronic health records of those participants? Or are you saying take a topic carries, see what data is out there, and pull all that data in the FaceBase for people to reuse or, sort of mine a combined set? What does that look like?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Lillian. So I think in my mind, this can be both, because one example we have heard, like if we take craniosynostosis as an example, that this is if we wanted to get more cases, and then we reach out to other resources where you already have part of that as a electronic health record, and then using process the data so we can enhance our power to do research. In terms of the dental caring study, I was just thinking about this data contributed from Mary's school, and then so that's something that we can certainly use that as an example, and then connecting with other dental electronic health records, and then see what are some of the possible ways to help us to get more diverse data into our FaceBase, so that to use that as a way to enhance the power of our clinical study, or use that as a to inform more basic study as well.
So you're saying that take the core data sets into FaceBase, and you also have the genomics data.
So let me expand on what we've been thinking about, and it's concepts right now, getting through the layers of possible approvals we might have to go through to make this happen. We'll see. Hopefully it'll happen. But so the study she's referring to, CORA, recruited people in Western Pennsylvania and in West Virginia. And they recruited, it has some cohorts that are longitudinal, some that are cross-sectional, but anyway, they live in those areas. And in Western Pennsylvania and even West Virginia, one of the largest healthcare providers is UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and the dental school. So, so the idea is that many of the people who we recruited will also have been using the dental school or the medical school for their healthcare. So then layered on top of that is that Pitt is an all of us recruiting site, and they have, and we also have a CTSI, as many large universities do, and the PI for both of those is Steve Reese. And he's been a really good collaborator with us in the dental school for a variety of projects. So we've been, brainstorming with him on what we could do. So about a year ago, they did a pilot project of looking at how well they could link the electronic health records that are in UPMC to the dental records that are in the dental school. Because again, many people get their health care from both places. So they pulled out 20,000 people and were able to link to dental records in the dental school for about 60% of them. So that's one piece. Then another piece is that the dental school has a research registry. So every patient who comes into the school signs a consent form that their data could be used for research purposes. And it's strictly an opt-in rather than an opt-out for Pitt. They would, or the IRBs at Pitt would not allow sort of an opt-out. But anyway, they've opted in. So the question we're struggling with is how far can we take that? So everybody consented to be in my research study. Some of them will have consented to the dental school's research registry, and some of them consented to their medical records, either through all of us or other projects that are going on in the medical school. So the questions we're struggling with is how could we make that happen? So if anybody's done anything similar with their records, I'd love to hear about it. And we have all the problems that everybody else has. The medical school is, the dental school is Axiom, the medical school is Epic, or whatever the big medical school data set is. So even if we link everybody, how well will we be able to, combine the data? But that's what we're striving for.
So let me then just conclude this. This is great. And I think, that what we've done with Mary is an example, is a really good example. And now maybe we're on to the next question, which is the challenges. Yeah, I think if we, from the FaceBase perspective, if we describe the problem as let's integrate the EHR into FaceBase, we're doomed for failure. So we really need to pick our battles, and we're not going to compete with UPMC or Regan Street as these large efforts who are integrating and creating research data warehouses and so on. So pilots, we need to, and FaceBase has been successful because from a operational perspective, we've been very use case and user driven. So how do we take the incorporation of the EHR data, which we all recognize as important in clinical elements, and how do we pick our use cases to focus and drive what we do So we provide a unique value to the community that's going to be above and beyond what all these institutions are going to be doing by themselves anyway, and trying to solve the big problems. So things like what we're doing with Mary is a great example, right? Very focused. We know exactly what we need to do. We know who to talk to. We know what the data elements are. And so let's incorporate that in a way that we can build on it. And so, you know, to Yang's point about pilots, okay, so what are the other small number of things that we can focus and excel and succeed on that will move us down the path, you know, for incorporating EHR data, right, in ways that will be beneficial and meaningful even in the short term. And so I think, you know, this idea of let's talk about pilots rather than, oh, let's integrate the EHR, dental and medical EHR are a really productive way of doing that.
Could I make a quick comment about the challenges that I should have said also? So this is just a couple things that I've observed from working with some of the big electronic health records databases that are out there, particularly All of Us and the Million Veterans data. So they have very comprehensive electronic health records from the VA Medical Center and from, well, the whole world, the whole US for all of us. And something we have to keep in mind is one of the key things that they do to protect the integrity and privacy of their data is that you cannot take the data away from their workbenches. You can only analyze the data internally on their cloud systems or whatever. So that's something we're going to have to keep in mind and feel out the data providers on how, or should we actually store the data, or should it be some other form?
I just want to follow up on that, what Dr. Marazita said. I agree with Dr. Marazita. I'm not sure, except for data gathered through prospective clinical studies, EHR-based data we may not be able to place it in within the FaceBase, but the way the alternate would be providing a link to that host site and giving controlled access, that because most of these organizations, they sign data agreements with the healthcare organization, so they have to comply with that. It constrains them from giving the data out to the investigator. So often, like for example, I am a Regan's chief investigator, but that doesn't mean, but I'm also in a university researcher. So whenever I'm working with Regan's chief health record data, I can only access through their systems. I'm given access. That's the only way it works.
Lou?
Yes, I want to amplify one of the advantages of initiating pilot efforts from FaceBase that Yang actually touched on, but to amplify, I thought when Vidhya was organizing this panel, one goal she was trying to fulfill through this panel and to facilitate FaceBase to go forward is to really take advantage of not only the electronic records that are valuable, but also what FaceBase is uniquely the best at. So FaceBase has been accommodating different data types. Down the road, the power of integrating multi-model and multi-dimensional data with, including health records, really will be more and more realized. And so I just want to amplify on that.
Can I get back to Dr. Thankam? And can you expand on some challenges that you've worked through so far? Maybe there are some answers for some questions that have been raised that you've already thought through. So could you share those with us?
Sure. We have a lot of challenges, right? We overcome a lot of challenges. And I see Dana Fisher. Dana is also on the panel. She would remember all the challenges we experienced when we started the EDR study through the National Dental Practice-Based Research Network. It took the first and foremost is the legal challenge. IRB is one thing, but getting legal permission, and it took me 2 years to execute data agreements with the dental vendors and with practices. Practices were very concerned with the privacy of their patient data, and we went back and forth, and we assured we will only get de-identified data that will be generated from their systems by the vendors on their behalf. And even then, they wanted us to keep the de-identified data in a secure environment. And the data can only be used for the research questions for which we asked permission. So those are the challenges we have. The challenge is when we are getting data from different systems, there are variations in how even structured data are recorded. A lot of customizations, like even we would think in dental practices, they are using procedure codes. All practices would be using the same CDT procedure codes. No, they customize it. They put an S at the end, so many things. So we have to be very careful characterizing the data, that whether they are structured or unstructured, carefully characterizing that is so important. So time and effort involved, that is another. I don't want to say it is a challenge, but that's something we have to keep in mind.
Can I follow up on that first challenge that you mentioned? So if you say that the permissions have been around a particular research question, do you think then it's probably the wisest course to focus very much around the phenotype and one particular research area and then build a data set around that instead of free access to all data types? Does that make sense? Is it better to go in that route?
Yeah, I would say that is appropriate to start with, because this is still new for everybody, not just for dentistry, but even for medicine. Medicine has definitely, they have done some work, joint work, crowdsourcing work, especially related to NLP, and made available de-identified data. But even then, I would say you're right. It was the way they did it was doing it around a specific research question or disease. Yeah.
And I think that makes a lot of sense under the idea of a pilot, trying to make it narrow to start out, right? And then decide how much of the complete records you actually would want to try to incorporate into FaceBase, which ideally would not be the whole record.
Would you also say then single center would be the best way to start, just because Dr. Thankam, you said that the permissions vary between different sites, even within the same healthcare exchange almost?
So I want to say we could start with single site. That is definitely an appropriate way to do it. It all depends on how we have, we have the consent in place right now, right? But I also want to say, because you mentioned about health information exchange, I just want to add. So Regan Street Institute, they are honest brokers to use that health information exchange data for research, and which means each time they generate the data set, before they hand off to the investigator, they have to go and get permission from each healthcare systems, whether they would share the patient data, patient list, and say, hey, let's say it's patients diagnosed with Sjogren's disease. These patients have been considered eligible for this research study on Sjogren's disease. Is it okay to share your patient's data? And if the healthcare system says, no, we cannot, then we cannot have access. So, yeah. So, but I wouldn't say it all depends on how, the availability. If there is a possibility of including multi-healthcare system data, we should definitely go. But I think the disease type or the condition should be confined. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to follow up on that. I totally agree with Dr. Thankam. I think it really depends on what we want to focus on as a pilot, because if you're talking about a rare condition, a particular site may not have enough numbers for you to have the sufficient power to do that kind of analysis. Versus if you are, talking about some very common disease like dental caries, periodontal disease, and then that's much easier. And also, I think this integration about medical dental records, it's a growing pain. We're all experiencing it, right? I see patients every Thursday, and then, when we look at in dental practice, most of the, all the insurance codes are all based on really doing procedures, and that's how you charge. Versus in medicine, it's more of a diagnosis and then follow the list. So there are just a lot of different ways approaching this, and also, how do we bring these two different platforms together in order to get something meaningful out of it. And one good example, I think I might have shared this with people before, in the state of California, you can no longer, this started a couple of years ago, you can no longer write paper prescriptions. So every prescription has to be done electronically. But as a result of that, that information is available to every patient. So I get to see what my patient is taking for high blood pressure, for cholesterol, this and that. So that's something, something very simple, but it's doable, right? You can have an integration, because that's one patient who's taking, maybe some antibiotics for some odontogenic infection, and then, but also with other medication. So these kind of things, that's why I think, if we focus on something as a pilot to start, we can build on that.
So going off of that message, I had another question. Just because anybody who has worked with an EHR knows the noise that comes with it and the breadth of data that comes with it. So I wanted to hear the panel's thoughts on how can we leverage this discovery aspect of EHR while also keeping it readily usable by researchers without having to spend so much time and effort? Is it, do you think, in curated data sets? Do you think a more sandbox-like feature? So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that question is directed at me. So I will try to answer. Of course, Jay, you can also chime in. Others also who have experience working with the EHR data. So, yes, you brought up a very good point. There is a lot of noise in EHR data. We have to keep in mind EHR data is gathered during patient care. It's not for research. So we have to keep that in mind. So essentially what we have to do is, the first step is to assess the data quality. There are several metrics. It is still a work in progress research. It's a lot of people are doing that, but we still have ways to go. So some of the measures we look at is the completeness, then concordance, which means we compare the, let's say, the diagnosis written as structured data versus what is recorded in the clinical notes. So that way, that increases our confidence. Okay, this patient has that diagnosis. Then concurrence, is it a more recent one? data, or is it a dated diagnosis from 20 years ago? We will be the first, and the other thing is really characterizing those clinical findings, so phenotyping, carefully characterizing it, and characterizing those variations. I don't know whether we could start with curated data set, absolutely, but this is an emerging area of research. So I would suggest we invest our time and effort in curating data sets specific to certain disease conditions, because so that everybody can learn from that. Even providers can learn from that. They will learn what is missing from the EHR, and even informatics professionals can help the leadership or administration in improving the data entry at the point of care. Yeah.
Yes, Dr.
So following on that, I'm hoping that one of the things we'll be able to do at Pitt is leverage all the work that the All of Us project has done to bring all the electronic health records into line. So that we've done that with the Pittsburgh records already, so that hopefully there would be fewer barriers in terms of the noise. There'll always be noise, but hopefully they'll have already done sort of the concordance type analyses.
It would be a good start, yes.
And many sites are like that now. There's so many opportunities to participate in large-scale projects that maybe we can, take advantage of. Exhibiting.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. I was just going to add that as what Dr. Thankam said is, the data set is rich. The data set is very rich. People complain about how, bad it is. It's not, because it's our job, right? If as an informaticist, if I want to use this data set for research, it's my job to develop natural language processing pipeline, to train computers to read clinical notes. We cannot force clinicians to use drop-down list all the time. It can cause frustrations in them. So data set information is that, it's there. It's just up to us how we extract it in a way that is analyzable by statistical methods.
Just so adding to that, I think what you're saying is that studies such as All of Us could point us to the most relevant variables in an EHR. For example, if I look at an EHR data table, we have prescription ordered by, then we have time prescription order submitted, time prescription order filled. Do we really need all of these? Maybe somebody needs that in pharmacy, maybe this is very relevant to somebody else. So I think the question is, what is relevant to us in this research space? And do we really need, just for the sake of data being rich, do we even need to talk about integrating the whole of EHR when, to be honest, what we need are probably just a handful of variables?
Well, this goes to my point, right, which is I think it's dangerous to talk about generically integrating the EHR. I think that sets you up for failure. And I really do think that we would be, at least in the immediate future, identify some specific use cases that we want to go after and focus on that with specific health networks, because again, everything is different. USC is a Cerner site, right? What are we going to do, right? And everyone's got their own data warehouse and so on. And then we know in the practice side that, there's some people are integrating dental data directly into their Epic system. Some people aren't. So, I think if we focus on a network which has specific consenting policies in place, specific technology in place, and we understand what we want to do with it, and curate, have high quality, well curated data sets with the right elements in it, right, then the chances of getting some progress and reuse, I think, are enhanced.
Yes, Lou.
Thank you, Vidhya. So my question for the panel then is, how ready do you think the field or the fields are for the efforts to identify variables to be well harmonized or even, closely coordinated. So as much as possible, the same or very similar sets of variables are extrapolated from different efforts.
I think everybody has been sort of softened up by projects like All of Us, and a number of other places, not just at Pitt, are trying to incorporate dental with medical disease. Aren't you involved in some of those efforts? So, and in other places as well. So I think at the time is really right to start doing this under the FaceBase moniker. And Pedro was trying to make a comment.
It was a question to you, Marian, and I like the idea of a pilot and setting up the templates. And Epic is a EHR, but it's also a research tool where we could share our templates and the questions and the format so that we standardize how craniofacial teams ask questions. And if they consent to all of us, then it's already in that standard format. Do you envision expanding your project now that it has the Epic model already integrated? You just say, get it an IRB consented through our universal IRB, and we will, export it into this sandbox so that it could grow exponentially.
So that's several steps down the road, I would say. We're still, talking to the relevant players, but yeah, that would be a really cool endpoint to strive for.
So to answer Lou's question about harmonization, I would say we have harmonized data based on the research question we are answering. Yeah, between dental and health record data. We have to do that. There is no way we could analyze that data. Like, for example, everybody who has at Regan Street, they see even dental data. They say dental data is much cleaner than health record data. That's what they say. There is more consistency. Despite that, what we have seen, the variations in terms of clinical notes, providers write it simple caries that will be written in 4 or 5 different ways. Decay, cavity, lesion, hole, and caries. So what we have to do is we have to map that to a standard vocabulary. Those are the work we need to do. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind, we cannot force them to write certain things in a certain way for the sake of research, because patient care is paramount there. So these are things we have to do at the back. And the same thing in health record data. Even lab values. We would think lab values are standardized. No, it can be in just calcium levels, can be in 10 different ways. So even the metrics they use. So we have to map that to one standard value. So those are the back-end work we have to do. Everybody is talking about AI and machine learning, but the reality is feeding the data into that AI model, that's only 10% or 20% of the work. All the work is about pre-processing the data. And in addition to that, in order to do that, we also have to have a good knowledge of how the context in which this data is gathered. That is paramount. So it's a multidisciplinary team that needs to be involved in this kind of works.
Thank you all so much. So we're at time, I think, right? Maybe any final thoughts from the audience, if you have them. Any final thoughts from the panelists? If not, then we can move on to Carl's closing thoughts. Thank you again so much for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I add one thing? Because Jennifer, a lot of NIDCR program officials are here. One request I would like to make is we have a shortage of informatics professionals in dentistry. And years ago, I am a product of NIDCR supported T15 fellowship. And that was 20 years ago. NIDCR used to support that program, informatics program, but that ended in 2016. It would be great if NIDCR could consider supporting training programs to create that workforce. And Carl and I, we talked about it, even about FaceBase being a platform to train that workforce as well. That would be really great. Then you could have multiple Thankams in the future.
Jennifer's here.
Yes, I second all of that. Thank you.
So thank you for that. And we've thought a lot about that, and especially how best to do it. Should there be targeted T32s? Should there be slots within existing grants? And so we're working on it. And I thank you for bringing it up because there is a shortage and we need to move in that direction.
And Dr. Marazita knows me right from, I was a K-12 scholar. That's where I started my career.
But I do have a question about that point is, do we need dental informaticians, or do we need to draw the bigger pool of informaticians into dental research? Because, I mean, it's not only our issue, right? I mean, it's across the whole research enterprise.
My personal feeling of that is that to the extent that we are training people to do dental research, that just like you expect a dental researcher to have competency in genomics and lab technique and all these other things, that you need to have a basic competency, digital competency and data competency. So to that extent, I think we have to have core ways of training dental researchers in basics of informatics.
You know, I would defer that question to Jay, who is a recent graduate. Yeah.
Thank you. And Dr. Thankam has trained me, so I learned all of these things from Dr. Thankam. I think we need to train dentists into this. And that's how, if we look into the health informatics history, we started training physicians into informatics so that we can design the electronic health records so that they are not getting frustrated. So here, domain expertise is so important when we are working with this data. So it is, of course, we will have computer scientists and other experts in it, but if we train our dentists, so when they're practicing, they will find that problem, what's the problem, and then with the informatics skill set, they can answer that problem that can be further translated to the chair side.
Dr. Marazita?
So honestly, we need both sides. We need trained clinicians, like the physician scientist training programs. We should have dentist scientist training programs that just adds a year to their training, and that makes them much more aware of how to use computational approaches. But the idea of pulling in people who are already trained and expert into an interest in the DOC is also extremely important, especially as Google's laying off a bunch of people. We're getting many more applicants for our positions than we've had in the last few years. So the time could be right for people to retrain.
Right. I certainly wouldn't argue with that.
Yes, Lou?
And I would like to ask our panel moderator to share her professional journey in answering this question.
Yeah, thank you, Lou. I'm also a recent graduate, and I'm a dentist with bioinformatics PhD. And I go back to the point that Dr. Thankam made in that this is a multidisciplinary exercise. So we do need dentists who are informatics trained, such as myself. But I was in a computational lab for my PhD, and there are folks there who are doing methods work who need the context that we provide so we can all work together on this goal. because while I have undergone informatics training and I can work the EHR, I am not really an expert in developing methods to do that efficiently. But what I can do very well is communicate with computational folks on how this happens in the clinic, how this can translate into clinical care, and what we need in the middle. And they can tell me if what I'm asking is computationally feasible, is that even an efficient way of doing what we are doing? So this conversation happens almost the entire life cycle of data, right from entry to execution and analysis. So I think there is merit to both trainees plus other specialties as well who come into this conversation. And there is a need for this whole workforce focused on DOC.
I really like the idea of the life cycle of research and researchers. And, you know, when I started out, we were scrambling just to get out in the world and collect data. And we didn't even know exactly what we were going to do with it. But now all that data is still there and is getting enriched further and further. And the more we can interest people into utilizing the data, the better off we'll all be.
And with that, I think we're going to have to wrap this up in the interest of people's travel times and et cetera. So thank you so much, Vidhya, for being our moderator. Thank you so much, our panelists. And now we have closing thoughts from Carl.
I'll make this brief. Yang did a great summary from yesterday. I want to thank everyone for showing up for this meeting. It's been fantastic. We had all these people in the room and 30 people online. We worked really hard to try to make this a good experience for everyone. Hopefully it was useful. I personally found it to be very useful. The panel's great, the talk's great, had a lot of good conversations. So I would say thank you again for attending. Thanks for Chris for doing a lot of the kind of on-site and the NIDCR people.
And thank you to Alicia for helping me so much, and Linda Hattemer and Sean Sanders for her remote support. Thank you.
And I think, so that's that. If you have any comments, feedback, hopefully we'll be in a position to do this again next year. This has been a great wrap up for our phase 3 of FaceBase, and we're really pleased to have the opportunity to tell you what we've done and also to get all of your input and feedback. And so hopefully we'll all see you again next year. If you have any thoughts or comments on how we can improve this or make this more valuable, please let us know. Lou, did you want to?
I just wanted to say, now that Alicia has worked out the venue on campus, you guys are always welcome to come to Bethesda.
Great. Well, everyone have a safe trip home. Those who are traveling, thank you again for your contributions, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you.